I want to start with the smell because everything else, the sounds, the photographs, the thing in the basement, all of it came after the smell. And the smell was the first sign that I had moved into something I did not understand. The house was a 1940s colonial on a quiet street in a suburb I will not name. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a finished basement, a backyard with an oak tree that was older than the house and had roots that had been pushing up through the concrete patio for years. My wife and I had looked at 22 houses over 7 months. We made offers on 3 of them and lost 2, and were outbid on the 3rd. And by the time we found this one, we were tired and slightly desperate in the way that people become desperate when they have been looking for a home for a long time and are beginning to believe they will never stop looking. The price was right. The inspection came back clean. The previous owners, an elderly couple who had lived there for 31 years, had moved to a retirement community in Florida. We closed on a Thursday. We started moving in on Saturday. The smell was there on Saturday. Not strong, not immediately alarming. Just present a low, sweet, slightly chemical undertone beneath the normal smell of an empty house. The dust and old wood and stale air that you expect when you open a house that has been closed up for several weeks. I noticed it when I carried the first boxes through the front door and into the hallway. I set the boxes down and I stood in the hallway and I breathed and I thought, old house, old smell means nothing. By the end of Saturday, I had stopped noticing it. By the end of Sunday, I had stopped noticing it again, which means I had started noticing it again in the hours in between without being fully aware that I had. This is something I want to be precise about. The smell did not come and go. The smell was constant. What came and went was my awareness of it, in a cycle I could not predict or control. I would be unaware of it for hours, and then suddenly and completely aware of it. The way you are suddenly aware of a sound that has been playing in the background for a long time, and that you have been filtering out without knowing you were filtering it. My wife noticed it on Monday evening. She had been away for the weekend, her mother's birthday, and had arrived home to find me surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and asked how the move had gone and then stopped in the middle of the kitchen and said, "What is that smell?" I said I had been smelling it since Saturday. She looked at me. She said, "Why didn't you tell me? I thought about it." I said I did not know, and that was true. I had been aware of the smell for 2 days and had not thought to mention it, had not thought to investigate it, had not thought about it as anything other than a background feature of the new house, something to be attributed to age or previous occupants or some property of the building I had not yet identified. This passivity disturbed me later. It disturbs me now. I am a person who notices things and acts on what I notice. I did not act on the smell for 2 days, and I still cannot fully explain why. We searched the house for a source. We went through every room systematically, getting low, checking baseboards and corners and the areas behind furniture. We checked under the sinks in both bathrooms and the kitchen for water damage or mold. We checked the basement, which was finished but had a utility corner with a water heater and a furnace and a sump pump. And my wife got down on her hands and knees and checked behind the water heater and said the smell was stronger there, distinctly stronger. And I got down next to her and confirmed it. We called a plumber. He came the next day and found nothing, no leak, no water damage, no organic material in the drainage. He said he could smell something but couldn't locate a source, and suggested we call an HVAC technician in case something had gotten into the ductwork. The HVAC technician found nothing in the ductwork. We called the previous owners. It took 3 days to reach them, and when we did, the wife answered and was pleasant and asked how we were settling in, and said she was so happy the house had gone to a nice young couple, and I asked her about the smell. There was a pause. A pause long enough that I noticed it, long enough that I said, "Hello, are you still there?" And she said yes, sorry, she was still there. and she said she wasn't sure what I was describing, and I described it again, and she said perhaps it was the basement. The basement had always had a particular smell. She was sure it was nothing, and she wished us well and ended the call. It was the way she paused that I thought about afterward. The photographs turned up 3 weeks after we moved in. We were painting the second bedroom, the one we planned to use as a home office, and I was taping off the window trim when I noticed that the previous owners had left something on the window ledge, tucked behind the curtain rod where it would not be immediately visible. It was a photograph, black and white, slightly yellowed, printed on the thick paper stock of mid-century photography. A family photograph, a man and a woman and 3 children arranged in the backyard I recognized, with the oak tree behind them. Formal, stiff, the posture of people who did not have their photograph taken often. I turned it over. On the back, in pencil, someone had written a name and a year. The year was 1958. I set it on the dresser and kept taping. I found the second photograph inside the closet in the master bedroom, between the back wall of the closet and a piece of trim that had pulled away from the wall. Older than the first, the paper more degraded, the image darker. A single figure, standing in what I recognized as the basement, facing the camera. The image was not clear enough to make out the features. The year written on the back was 1947. The third photograph was inside the wall. I found it because we had a small plumbing issue in the master bathroom, a slow drain, and the plumber who came to fix it had to open the wall behind the shower to access a pipe. And when he pulled the drywall section away, he found, in the cavity between the studs, a photograph and a small bundle of papers tied with string that had mostly rotted away. The photograph was the oldest yet, the image almost entirely dark, barely resolved, and what I could see in it I cannot describe. The papers were handwritten, and the portions still legible were in a language I did not recognize. The plumber set them on the bathroom counter and said nothing, and finished his work and left quickly, more quickly than I would have expected, given how little work remained when he found them. I sat on the bathroom floor with the photograph and the papers for a long time. The smell was very strong in the bathroom that day, the strongest it had ever been in any room. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the dark and I was aware of the house around me in a way I had not been aware of it before. Not as a structure, not as a space, but as something that had been occupied for a very long time by people I did not know, that had witnessed things I had no access to, that had accumulated something in its walls and floors, and the space behind its walls that the current occupants were not the first to notice. I got up at 2 a.m. and went to the kitchen and sat at the table. Smell was there, sweet and low and chemical, coming from everywhere and nowhere. I took the photograph and the papers to a local historian the next day. She looked at the photograph for a long time without speaking. Then she said she would need to examine the papers more carefully, but that from what she could see they appeared to be in an older form of a Central European language. She asked where I had found them. I told her. She looked at me with an expression I found difficult to read. She said the house had been built in 1941, and that the land before that had been the site of a much older structure that had been demolished. She said she would look into the history of the property and let me know what she found. She called me 2 weeks later. She said the land had changed hands 7 times before the current house was built. She said 2 of those transfers had followed deaths on the property. She said she had been unable to locate records of the structure that had been demolished, which she found unusual. She said the photograph appeared to be of a person who had lived in the demolished structure. I asked what had happened to the people who lived in the demolished structure. She was quiet for a moment. She said the records were incomplete. We lived in the house for 8 months. The smell never diminished. In the last 2 months, I became aware that it was worse in certain rooms at certain times of day, that it was strongest in the basement and weakest in the upstairs bedrooms, that on certain nights I began to dread without being able to articulate why. It was present throughout the entire house, at a uniform intensity that felt less like a smell and more like a temperature, an environmental condition you were inside of rather than adjacent to. We moved out in November. We told the realtor the house needed work we were not prepared to undertake. We took a significant financial loss. My wife has not spoken about the house since we left. I have asked her once. She said she did not want to talk about it. I think she smelled it too on those nights. I think she understood what I understood, which was not a fact or a story or an explanation, but a feeling, the feeling of being in a space that has held something for a very long time and has learned, over many years of holding it, to hold it very tightly. I still smell it sometimes. Not in our new house. Not anywhere I can locate. Just sometimes in the night, when I am between sleeping and waking, I become aware of something low and sweet and slightly chemical at the edge of. And I know, with a certainty I cannot account for, that it is not a smell. It is a reminder. The neighbors came to see us 3 days after we moved in, and I want to tell you what they said and also what they did not say, because the two things together are more frightening than either one alone. There were two of them, a couple in their late 60s, the kind of people who have lived in the same house for decades and have developed a relationship with their neighborhood that most people never achieve, a granular, detailed, personal knowledge of every house on the street and the history of everyone who has ever lived in them. Their names were Robert and Helen. They came in the evening with a plate of cookies and the particular demeanor of people who have prepared themselves for a specific conversation. We let them in. We sat in the living room, the four of us, in the middle of the boxes and the furniture that hadn't been placed yet, and Helen set the cookies on a box, and Robert looked around the room with an expression I noticed but did not at the time know how to read. He asked how we were settling in. We said fine, the usual things, a lot of boxes still to unpack. The kitchen was functional, we were happy to be here. Robert nodded. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that they had lived next door for 22 years and that they had known the previous family, the Wallaces, well, and that the Wallaces had been good neighbors and good people. We said we were sure that was true. Robert said there had been others before the Wallaces. He said the house had a history of turnover which was unusual for the neighborhood. He named 6 families over 40 years, gave approximate dates, said they had all been fine people as far as he and Helen had known them. I asked why there had been so much turnover. Robert looked at Helen. Helen looked at Robert. Helen said that people found the house difficult to settle into. I asked what she meant. There was a pause. The kind of pause that is doing work, that is making a decision about how much to say. I sat in it and waited. Robert said that several of the families had mentioned sounds, that multiple tenants over the years had mentioned sounds in the night, not dramatic sounds, not crashing or breaking, but what he described as the sounds of occupancy. Footsteps, movement, the sounds of a house that was being used by more people than were actually in it. I asked if he had heard these sounds. He said no. He said the sounds seemed to come from inside the house, not outside of it. He said he was not trying to alarm us. He said he wanted us to know what previous tenants had said so that we would not be frightened if we encountered the same thing, that there was likely a structural explanation related to the age of the house. He said this last part quickly, in the manner of someone who does not believe what they are saying. I asked him directly, in 22 years, had he ever seen anything that concerned him at this house? Had he ever seen anything from his property, looking at this property, that he could not explain? The pause this time was very long. Helen put her hand on Robert's arm. Robert said they had seen lights in the house on several occasions when the house was between tenants and should have been empty. He said they had called the realtor the first time and been assured it was the realtor doing walkthroughs. He said they had called again the second and third times and received the same assurance. He said after the 4th time they stopped calling. I asked how many times they had seen the lights. He said they had stopped counting after about a dozen. We were quiet for a moment. Helen reached forward and picked up a cookie from the plate and held it without eating it. Then she said she needed to tell us something that Robert had not wanted to tell us. Robert looked at her with an expression I would describe as resignation. She said that 8 years ago, when the family before the Wallaces had been living in the house, a young family, a couple with 2 children, she had seen something from her upstairs window one evening. She had been in the bedroom and had looked out, and the window of this house, the window directly across from hers, which was the window of what we now used as a guest bedroom, had been lit. There was a figure standing at the window. She described the figure standing very still, looking out. She said at first she had assumed it was one of the family, the father perhaps, or the older child. She had started to look away and then looked back because something about the figure's stillness had not seemed right. The family's car was not in the driveway. She had specifically registered the absence of the car before she looked at the window. The house should have been empty. She said the figure stood at the window for a long time. She said she stood at her own window and watched it. She said after perhaps 10 minutes the figure turned slowly, not in the manner of someone who had noticed they were being observed, but slowly, deliberately, as if completing a long-considered decision, and faced into the room rather than out of it, and the light in the room went out. She said she had never mentioned it to the family who were living there at the time. I asked why. She said she did not know what to say. She said she had told herself it was a family member she had not recognized. She said she had become less certain of this over time. We thanked them for coming. They left the cookies. They walked back across the lawn to their house, and Robert opened the door and they went inside, and I watched the door close behind them. I stood in my new living room surrounded by boxes in the house I had just bought. I looked at the stairs. I thought about the sounds of occupancy, footsteps, movement. The sounds of a house being used by more people than were in it. I went upstairs. I stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom. I looked at the window Helen had described, the one that faced her house, the one the figure had been standing at. The room was empty. Of course it was empty. It was a room full of afternoon light and unpacked boxes and nothing else. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I went back downstairs and I did not go into that room again for the rest of the day. That night at 3:17 a.m. I woke up, not from a sound, not from a dream. I simply woke up with the complete and immediate awareness of being awake that you have when something has changed in the environment rather than inside of you. I lay in the bed and I listened. The house was quiet, and then from the direction of the guest bedroom, the sound of a single footstep. The specific creak of the floorboard in a particular spot, which I knew because I had walked across that floor and had noticed the spot where it complained. One footstep, then nothing. I lay in the dark and I breathed and I decided. I got up. I walked down the hall to the guest bedroom. I stood outside the door. I put my hand on the handle. I pushed it open and I looked into the room. It was empty, but the window was open. I had closed the window that afternoon. I was certain I had closed it because the afternoon had been cold, and I had specifically gone around the house closing windows before the temperature dropped. The window was open, not wide, a few inches, enough to let in the night air, which was moving the curtain in a slow, regular rhythm. I stood in the room and I looked at the open window and I looked at the floor where the footstep had come from. And I understood something that I had been resisting understanding since the neighbors had come to see us 3 days ago. The house was not empty when we moved into it. It has never been empty. Whatever is here was here before the Wallaces, before the family with 2 children, before all 6 families that Robert could name going back 40 years. It was here before any of them. It has been here longer than the house, and it was standing at the window, looking out, waiting for the next family to arrive. I am going to tell you about the room at the end of the hall, and I am going to tell you everything I know about it. And when I am finished, I am going to tell you the one thing I have never told anyone, which is the thing that made me understand that what was happening in my house was not something I had a framework for. We bought the house in April. My husband Marcus and I, our daughter Lily, who was 4 years old. The house was a Victorian, built in 1887, 3 stories, 6 bedrooms, completely absurd for a family of 3. But Marcus had always wanted a Victorian, and the price was anomalous, significantly below market for the size and the neighborhood. And we had bought it before either of us looked too hard at the reason for the price. The reason, I came to understand, was the room at the end of the 3rd floor hall. The 3rd floor had 3 rooms. A large room at the top of the stairs that we made into a playroom for Lily, a smaller room in the middle that we used for storage, and the room at the end. The room at the end was approximately 12 feet by 12 feet, with a single window that faced the back of the property, 2 closets and wallpaper that was different from the rest of the house, newer, applied over the original plaster, a pattern of small yellow flowers on a cream background, the kind of wallpaper that was popular in the 1970s, and that someone had applied carefully, very carefully, overlapping seams trimmed precisely, a thorough job. The room smelled of the wallpaper paste still, after all those years. We did not use the room immediately. There was no furniture for it and no designated purpose, and so it remained empty while we filled the rest of the house, a closed door at the end of the hall that I walked past many times without thinking about it. The first thing Lily said about the room was in May, 5 weeks after we moved in. She had been playing on the 3rd floor and I was downstairs making dinner when I heard her talking, the distinctive cadence of a child in conversation, back and forth, pausing to listen, responding. I had learned over 4 years not to interrupt Lily mid-play, since she had a rich imaginative life, and interrupting her in the middle of it generally produced significant displeasure, and so I left her to it. When she came downstairs for dinner, I asked who she had been talking to. She said the girl in the yellow room. I stopped what I was doing. I asked what girl. She said the girl in the yellow room who lived there. She said the girl was shy and didn't talk much, but she was nice when you got to know her. I asked Lily to describe the girl. Lily described her as younger than herself, which put her at 3 or below. She said the girl had dark hair. She said the girl mostly stood in the corner by the window and didn't move around very much. She said the girl didn't know that we lived there now. I went upstairs after dinner and opened the room at the end of the hall, empty. The yellow wallpaper, the smell of old paste, the single window with the view of the back property, 2 closed closet doors. I opened the closets, both empty. I stood in the room for a moment and I thought about what Lily had said. I made the decisions that parents make in these situations: imaginative play, invisible friends, the vivid internal life of a 4-year-old. I closed the door and went back downstairs. The problem with that framework is that it broke down over the following weeks in ways that were small and specific and impossible to attribute to imagination. Lily began asking, at the end of each day, if she could bring something to the girl in the yellow room. Not her own toys, she was specific about this, emphatic. She did not want to give the girl her own toys. She wanted to bring her a glass of water or a piece of fruit, or on one occasion a small drawing she had made of a flower. I permitted some of these and explained that I would leave them outside the door, and in the morning the water would be there still and the drawing would be where I had put it, untouched, and Lily would accept this without distress, as if she understood that the girl could not physically receive these things but that the gesture was what mattered. In June, I began hearing it. Not sounds of movement, not footsteps. Something more particular and more difficult to categorize. A sound that I can only describe as presence, the acoustic quality of a room that is not empty even when it should be. I noticed it first when I was walking down the third-floor hall with a load of laundry. I walked past the closed door and stopped because the silence behind the door had a different texture than the silence behind the storage room door, had weight in it, fullness. I stood in the hall with the laundry basket and I listened to the silence behind the yellow room door. I knocked. I do not know why I knocked. It was an involuntary action, the social reflex of a person who has been conditioned to announce themselves before entering an occupied room. I knocked and then I stood with my hand raised and I thought about what I had just done. No response, of course. I opened the door, empty room, but I had knocked. In July, Marcus saw her. He had not believed what I told him about Lily's descriptions. He had been gentle about it. He was always gentle. But he had used the same framework I had used at first, the imaginative play explanation. And I had accepted this because I wanted to accept it, and because having a word for it made it more manageable. He came downstairs from the third floor at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening looking as I had never seen him look before in 9 years of marriage. He sat down at the kitchen table and he was quiet for a long time. Then he told me he had gone up to check the storage room for a box he needed, and on his way back he had passed the yellow room and the door had been slightly open, not fully, 3 or 4 inches. And he had looked through the gap out of habit and he had seen, standing at the window with its back to the door, a small figure. He said it was the size of a young child. He said it was standing completely still, looking out the window at the back of the property. He said he had stood in the hall and looked through the gap in the door for what he estimated was 30 seconds, and that in those 30 seconds the figure had not moved at all, had not turned, had not acknowledged the door being open or him being there, had simply stood at the window, still and small and patient, looking out at the dark backyard. He said he had pushed the door open. The room was empty. He said the window was cold when he checked it. He said it had been a warm evening and the window was closed and had been closed all day, and the glass was cold to the touch, notably cold, in a circular area approximately the size of a small handprint. We sat in the kitchen and we looked at each other. Lily was in bed. She had been in bed for an hour. I want to tell you now the thing I have never told anyone. I want to tell you what happened on the night of August 14th, which was the night that ended with us calling a priest at 11 o'clock in the evening and then spending the rest of the night in a hotel. At 11 p.m. on August 14th, I was in our bedroom on the second floor, reading. Marcus was already asleep. The house was quiet, that specific quiet of a house in which everyone is in their rooms and settled, a satisfied quiet. My phone rang. It was the baby monitor app. I still ran a monitor in Lily's room out of habit. She was 4, but she'd had night terrors as a toddler and the habit had persisted. The monitor had triggered on sound. I looked at the phone. The monitor showed Lily's room. Lily was in bed, visibly. She was lying on her side facing the camera, and I could see from the movement of her chest that she was breathing and that she was awake. Her eyes were open. She was looking at something in the room that the camera could not show me because it was behind the camera's field of view. She was having a conversation. I could hear it through the monitor, her voice, her cadence, the back and forth of a child in conversation. I could not hear another voice. I sat in bed and I listened to Lily talk to something in her room that the camera could not show me, and I thought about the girl in the yellow room at the end of the hall. And I thought about what Lily had said in May. The girl didn't know that we lived there now. And I thought about the fact that Lily's room was not on the third floor. Lily's room was on the second floor, on the other side of the house from the yellow room, which meant that whatever Lily was talking to had moved. I was in Lily's room in 30 seconds. I turned on the light. Lily looked at me with the startled expression of a child who has been interrupted. The room was empty except for her. I asked her who she had been talking to. She said the girl. I asked if the girl was in her room. Lily looked at me with the particular patience of a child explaining something obvious to an adult who should already understand. She said the girl had been in her room. She said the girl had come to ask her something. I asked what the girl had asked. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said the girl had asked if she could stay. I picked Lily up. I carried her to the master bedroom. I woke Marcus up. I told him what had happened. He looked at me and then he looked at Lily and then he got up and got dressed and called the priest whose number he had gotten from a colleague months ago and had not used because he had not wanted to need it. We went to a hotel that night. We listed the house for sale the following week. We did not tell the realtor everything. We told her enough that she listed it appropriately, that the paperwork reflected what we knew, that the next buyer would have access to what we had disclosed. I want to believe this was sufficient. I want to believe that what we disclosed was adequate warning. What I know is this. Somewhere there is a house with yellow wallpaper on the 3rd floor. There is a room at the end of the hall. There is a window that overlooks the backyard. And there is something standing at that window, small and still and patient, waiting. And the thing I cannot stop thinking about, the thing I have not told anyone until now, is what Lily said in the car on the way to the hotel. She had been quiet since I carried her out of her room, and Marcus was driving and I was in the back seat with her. And she turned and looked at me with the serious expression she used when she was trying to tell me something important. She said, "Mommy." I told her she could stay. I asked her what she meant. She said she told the girl she could stay in the house. She said the girl had been there a long time and was sad and just wanted someone to say she could stay. I looked at my daughter in the dark car. I asked her what the girl said when Lily told her she could stay. Lily turned back to the window. She said, "Thank you." She said she would wait for the next family. I have not been back to that house. I think about the next family sometimes. I hope they have a child who can hear her. I do not know if that would make things better. I think it might make things worse.